The dust swirled around Tabitha Reed's boots as she stood in the doorway of the one-room schoolhouse, staring at the door that hung crooked on its failing hinges, knowing that one more strong desert wind would send it crashing to the ground and leave her 23 students exposed to every wild thing that roamed the Nevada territory in 1878. She had arrived in Pyramid City just 3 months ago, a 22-year-old woman from Boston with dreams of bringing education to the frontier, and already the harsh realities of desert life were teaching her lessons her finishing school had never prepared her for. The door groaned against its weakened frame as she pushed it closed. The wood splintered and warped from the relentless sun and the occasional flash floods that turned the dry streets into rivers of mud. Tabitha ran her fingers along the damaged wood, calculating what she might afford on her meager teacher's salary. The school board had made it clear when they hired her that funds were scarce, that she would need to make do with what they provided, which amounted to little more than chalk, some battered textbooks, and a roof that only leaked in 3 places. She thought of writing to her father back in Boston, but pride kept her hand still. She had left Massachusetts against his wishes, determined to prove that a woman could make her own way in the world without depending on family money or a convenient marriage. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that still took her breath away, despite 3 months of witnessing such displays. Pyramid City sprawled below the schoolhouse, a collection of wooden buildings and canvas tents that served the miners, ranchers, and railroad workers who called this unforgiving land home. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could hear the distant sound of a piano playing in one of the saloons on Main Street. She locked the schoolhouse as best she could with the damaged door and made her way down the dusty path toward the boarding house where she rented a small room. Her landlady, Mrs. Morrison, was a kind woman who had taken pity on the young teacher and often saved extra portions from supper. As Tabitha walked, she passed the general store, the assay office, and then the blacksmith's forge, where the ring of hammer on anvil continued even as darkness approached. Tabitha had never spoken to the blacksmith, though she had seen him from a distance. He was hard to miss, standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. The local women whispered about him at church, about how he had arrived in Pyramid City 2 years ago and built his business from nothing, about how he kept to himself and never attended the social gatherings that broke up the monotony of frontier life. Some said he was running from something back east. Others claimed he simply preferred the company of horses to people. She slowed her pace as she approached the forge, drawn by curiosity and by a thought that had just occurred to her. A blacksmith would know about hinges and door frames. Perhaps he could advise her on how to repair what was broken, or at least tell her what it might cost. She hesitated at the edge of the open-air workspace, watching as the man inside plunged a glowing piece of metal into a barrel of water, sending up a hiss of steam. He turned as if sensing her presence, and Tabitha found herself looking into eyes the color of a winter sky. His face was streaked with soot, his dark hair damp with sweat, and his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep, roughened by smoke and heat, but not unkind. Tabitha straightened her spine, remembering her purpose. "I am Tabitha Reed, the schoolteacher. I was wondering if you might have a moment to discuss a matter of business." He set down his hammer and wiped his hands on a rag, stepping closer to the edge of the forge where the light from the fire illuminated his features more clearly. He looked to be in his late 20s, with a strong jaw and a scar that ran from his left temple into his hairline. "Dylan Kane," he said, offering a slight nod instead of extending his soot-covered hand. What kind of business would a schoolteacher have with a blacksmith? The schoolhouse door is falling apart, Tabitha explained, trying not to notice the way the firelight played across his features. The hinges are rusted through, and the frame is splintered. I was hoping you might tell me what it would cost to repair it, or if there is something I might do myself to extend its life until I can save enough money for proper repairs. Dylan walked to the edge of the forge and looked past her toward the schoolhouse on the hill. Even in the fading light, she could see his expression shift from polite interest to something more focused, more concerned. How long has it been like that? It has been getting worse since I arrived, but this week it became truly dangerous. I am afraid it will come off entirely, and then the children will have no protection from the elements or from the wild animals that sometimes wander through town. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze still fixed on the distant building. Then he looked back at her, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. I will come by tomorrow morning before you start lessons and take a look at it. No charge for the assessment. Tabitha felt a rush of relief mixed with surprise. That is very kind of you, Mr. Kane. I cannot pay much, but I can offer what I have saved. Let me see what needs doing first, he said, picking up his hammer again. Then we can talk about cost. She thanked him and continued on her way, but she found herself glancing back at the forge as she walked. Dylan Kane had already returned to his work, the hammer ringing against the anvil in a steady rhythm that followed her all the way to the boarding house. That night, Tabitha lay in her narrow bed and listened to the sounds of Pyramid City settling into its restless sleep. Somewhere a dog barked, and from the saloons came the occasional burst of laughter or the sharp report of a breaking glass. She thought about the schoolhouse door and about the unexpected kindness of a man she had never spoken to before today. In Boston, such matters would have been handled by her father's servants or by hired workmen who came and went without conversation. Here, in this raw new place, people had to rely on each other in ways that were both frightening and strangely thrilling. She woke before dawn, as was her habit, and dressed carefully in her most practical dress, a dark blue cotton that did not show the dust. She pinned her light brown hair into a tight bun and made her way to the schoolhouse in the gray pre-dawn light, wanting to be there when Dylan Kane arrived. The door looked even worse in the morning light, hanging at such an angle that she had to lift it to close it properly. She was struggling with it when she heard the sound of boots on the packed earth behind her. "Let me get that," Dylan said, and suddenly he was there beside her, his presence so close that she could smell the clean scent of soap, mixed with the ever-present hint of forge smoke. He lifted the door with ease, examining the hinges and the frame with the focused attention of someone who understood how things were built. Tabitha stepped back, giving him room to work, and found herself studying him in the growing light. He wore clean clothes this morning, a chambray shirt and dark trousers held up by suspenders, and his hair was neatly combed back from his forehead. The scar at his temple was more visible now, a pale line against his tanned skin. "This is worse than I thought," he said after a few minutes of examination. "The frame is rotted through in places, probably from water damage. The hinges are beyond saving. If I just replace the hinges, you will have the same problem again within a month." Tabitha's heart sank. "I see." "And to replace the frame," Dylan straightened and looked at her, his expression serious. "The whole frame needs to be rebuilt. New wood properly treated to withstand the climate here. New hinges properly fitted. It is not a small job." "I understand," Tabitha said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "If you could tell me what it would cost, I can begin saving. Perhaps by the end of the school term I will do it," Dylan interrupted. "The work, I mean. I will build you a new frame and hang a proper door." Tabitha stared at him. "Mr. Kane, that is very generous, but I cannot accept such charity. The cost of materials alone—" "I have the wood," he said, "and I can forge the hinges myself. It will take me a few days, working in the evenings after I finish my regular commissions, but I can have it done by the end of the week." "But why would you do this?" The question came out before Tabitha could stop it, more direct than was perhaps polite. Dylan looked away, toward the distant mountains that were now catching the first rays of sun. "Because children need a school," he said simply. "And because I know what it is like to try to make something work with tools that are broken." He turned back to her, and she saw something in his eyes that spoke of old pain, old struggles. "Let me do this. If it makes you feel better, you can pay me what you can afford when you can afford it." Tabitha felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In 3 months in Pyramid City, she had been treated with polite distance by most of the townspeople, welcomed for the service she provided but never quite accepted as one of them. This offer of help, given freely and without expectation, touched something deep inside her. "Thank you, Mr. Kane." "Truly, Dylan," he said, "if I am going to be working on your schoolhouse, you might as well call me Dylan." "Then you must call me Tabitha." He nodded, a small smile crossing his face for the first time, and she was struck by how it transformed his features from stern to almost gentle. "I will take measurements today and start work tonight. Try to keep that door closed as best you can for now." True to his word, Dylan returned that evening with a notepad and a length of measuring tape. Tabitha had dismissed her students for the day and was cleaning the chalkboard when she heard his footsteps outside. She watched through the window as he measured the door frame, making notes with a stub of pencil, his movements precise and methodical. Over the next few days, a pattern developed. Dylan would arrive after Tabitha dismissed school, would spend an hour or two working on preparing the wood and forging the hinges at his shop, and would sometimes walk by the schoolhouse to check measurements or to show her his progress. These brief encounters became the highlight of Tabitha's days, though she tried not to examine too closely why that might be. On the third evening, she brought him a jar of lemonade that Mrs. Morrison had made, thinking he might appreciate something cool after working in the heat of the forge all day. He accepted it with surprise and gratitude, and they stood together in the shade of the schoolhouse as he drank. "You are from back east," Dylan said, not quite a question. "Boston," Tabitha confirmed, "and you, Pennsylvania. A town so small it does not appear on most maps." He handed the empty jar back to her. "I learned blacksmithing from my father. He wanted me to take over his shop, but I needed to find my own way." "I understand that," Tabitha said softly. "My father wanted me to marry a man he had chosen, someone suitable who would give me a comfortable life. I wanted to be more than someone's suitable wife." Dylan looked at her with new interest. "So you came to the middle of the Nevada desert to teach children whose parents can barely afford to spare them from work." "I came to make a difference," Tabitha said, lifting her chin slightly. "Even a small one." "That is not a small thing," Dylan said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he meant every word. "What you are doing here matters." The installation of the new door frame took place on a Saturday, when there were no students to work around. Dylan arrived at dawn with the frame already assembled, a beautiful piece of work made from solid pine that he had carefully treated with linseed oil to protect it from the elements. Tabitha had not expected the frame to be anything special, but what Dylan had created was almost a work of art, with joints so precisely fitted that no light showed through the seams. "This is beautiful," she said, running her hand along the smooth wood. "Dylan, this is far more than I expected." He shrugged, but she could see the pleasure in his eyes at her praise. If something is worth doing, it is worth doing right. Help me position it, would you? They worked together through the morning, Dylan directing her on where to hold the frame while he secured it to the existing structure of the schoolhouse. It was physical work, and more than once Tabitha found herself out of breath, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. She was not accustomed to working with her hands in this way, and she discovered that she enjoyed the challenge of it, the sense of building something real and solid. By noon, the frame was in place, and Dylan was attaching the new door with hinges that gleamed like dark silver. The door itself he had also replaced, using wood that matched the frame, and he had fashioned a new latch that worked smoothly and could be locked securely from the inside. "Try it," he said, stepping back. Tabitha pulled the door closed and then pushed it open again. It moved without a sound, perfectly balanced and solid. She closed it again and tested the latch. Everything worked exactly as it should. She felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the generosity of what he had done. "It is perfect," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Dylan, I do not know how to thank you." He was gathering his tools, not looking at her, but she saw the back of his neck redden slightly. "You already did. Seeing it work right, knowing the children will be safe, that is thanks enough." "At least let me buy you lunch," Tabitha said impulsively. "There is a cafe on Main Street that serves a decent meal. It is the least I can do." Dylan hesitated, and she thought he might refuse, but then he nodded. "I would like that." They walked together down the hill into town, and Tabitha was aware of the curious glances they received from the townspeople they passed. A schoolteacher and a blacksmith were respectable enough professions, but she knew that any interaction between an unmarried man and woman would be noted and discussed. She found that she did not care as much as she might have expected. The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd, but they found a table near the window. Dylan ordered roast beef and potatoes, and Tabitha chose chicken with vegetables. As they waited for their food, the conversation flowed more easily than it had before, the shared work of the morning having broken through some barrier of formality. "How did you get that scar?" Tabitha asked, then immediately wished she could take the question back. "I apologize, that was too personal." "It is all right," Dylan said. "I got it in the war. I was young, barely 18, and thought I was invincible. A piece of shrapnel taught me otherwise." Tabitha did the mathematics in her head. If he had been 18 during the war, that would make him close to 28 now, perhaps 29. "You were fortunate it was not worse." "I was fortunate in many ways," Dylan agreed. "Many of my friends did not come home. I try to remember that when things seem difficult." Their food arrived and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Dylan asked, "Do you ever regret it? Leaving Boston, coming out here?" Tabitha considered the question carefully. "There are things I miss. The theaters, the bookstores, the ease of life in a settled place. But no, I do not regret it. Here, I feel like I am doing something that matters. In Boston, I would have been decorative, useful only for hosting dinner parties and bearing children for whatever man my father chose." "You make marriage sound like a prison sentence," Dylan observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Perhaps not all marriages," Tabitha amended, "but marriage without choice, without love, yes, that would be a prison." "And do you believe in love?" Dylan asked, his tone casual but his eyes intent on her face. Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "I believe in partnership, in respect, in shared dreams. Whether that is the same as love, I am not certain. I have not experienced it myself." "Nor have I," Dylan said quietly. "There was someone once, back in Pennsylvania, but she wanted a different life than I could give her. She married a banker." "I am sorry," Tabitha said, meaning it. Dylan shook his head. "Do not be. If she could not see the value in what I was building, then she was not the right person." I understand that now. After lunch, Dylan walked Tabitha back to the boarding house. They stood on the front porch, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "Thank you for lunch," Dylan said, "and for your company. I do not socialize much, as you have probably heard." "I have heard rumors," Tabitha admitted, "that you keep to yourself, that you are mysterious and possibly dangerous." Dylan laughed, a rich sound that Tabitha realized she had never heard before. "Dangerous? That is a new one." "I told them that any man who would build a schoolhouse door frame for free cannot be too dangerous," Tabitha said, smiling. "You defended me." Dylan's expression softened. "Thank you for that." "It was only the truth," Tabitha said. She took a breath, gathering her courage. "Dylan, I have enjoyed getting to know you these past few days. I wonder if you might like to take a walk with me sometime. There is a path that leads to the lake north of town, and I have been told the view is beautiful." Dylan's smile was slow and genuine. "I would like that very much." "Tomorrow afternoon, if the weather holds." "Tomorrow afternoon," Tabitha agreed, her heart lifting. She watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him quickly down the dusty street toward his forge. When she turned to go inside, she found Mrs. Morrison watching from the parlor window, a knowing smile on her round face. "That is a good man," the landlady said. "Quiet but good. He helped my son shoe a difficult horse once, would not take a penny for it." "He has been very kind," Tabitha said carefully. "Kind is one word for it," Mrs. Morrison said, her eyes twinkling. "That man built you a door frame fit for a church, not a rough schoolhouse. And he did it because he wanted to, not because he was paid. You mark my words, Miss Reed, Dylan Kane is courting you, whether he knows it himself yet or not." Tabitha felt her face flame. "Mrs. Morrison, we have only just become acquainted." "I have been alive 57 years, the landlady said comfortably, "and I know what I know. That man looks at you like you are the first drink of water after crossing the desert." That night, Tabitha lay in bed and allowed herself to think about Dylan Kane, about the careful way he had crafted something beautiful for her students, about the warmth in his eyes when he spoke to her, about the way her heart had raced when he agreed to walk with her tomorrow. She thought about his scarred temple and his gentle hands, about the way he had understood her need to make her own way in the world because he had done the same. Perhaps Mrs. Morrison was right. Perhaps something was beginning between them, something that could grow into the kind of partnership Tabitha had always hoped for but never quite believed existed. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The next day dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for a walk. Tabitha dressed carefully in a light green dress that her mother had made for her before she left Boston, one of the few fine things she had brought west. She pinned her hair in a softer style than her usual severe bun, allowing a few strands to curl around her face. Dylan arrived at the boarding house at 2 o'clock exactly, wearing clean trousers and a white shirt that made his tanned skin seem darker by contrast. He carried his hat in his hands, and his hair was still damp from washing. "You look beautiful," he said, the words simple and direct. "Thank you," Tabitha said, feeling suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." They walked through town and then onto the path that led north toward the lake. The trail wound through sagebrush and juniper, climbing gradually until they could see the expanse of Pyramid Lake spread below them, its waters an impossible shade of blue against the desert landscape. "I never tire of this view," Tabitha said softly. "In Boston, everything is green and cultivated. Here, the beauty is wild and harsh, but somehow more honest." "I feel the same," Dylan said. "In Pennsylvania, the land was already claimed, already shaped by generations of farmers and builders. Here, a man can still make his mark, can still create something new." They found a flat rock near the edge of the overlook and sat together, watching the light play across the water. Tabitha was intensely aware of Dylan's presence beside her, of the warmth of his arm just inches from hers. "Tell me about your students," Dylan said. "What are they like?" Tabitha smiled, always happy to talk about the children she taught. "They are bright and curious, though many of them come to school irregularly because their families need them to work. I have students from age 6 to 15, all in one room, which makes teaching a challenge. But when I see them master a difficult concept, or when one of the older ones helps a younger one with their letters, I remember why I came here." "Do you ever want children of your own?" Dylan asked, then seemed to realize how forward the question was. "I apologize. That was not appropriate." "It is all right," Tabitha said, considering her answer. "I think I do someday, but I also want to continue teaching to make a difference beyond my own family. I suppose I want both, which may not be possible." "Why not?" Dylan asked. "My mother raised 4 children and also ran a successful dressmaking business. She always said that women who claimed females could not do more than one thing well were simply trying to keep other women in their place." Tabitha looked at him with new appreciation. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Dylan said, a note of sadness entering his voice. "She died 5 years ago, pneumonia. My father followed her within a year. I think he could not bear to live without her." "They loved each other very much," Tabitha said softly. "They did. They fought sometimes, fierce arguments that made the windows rattle, but they always made up before sunset. My father said that love was not about never disagreeing, it was about choosing each other even when you did disagree." "That is beautiful," Tabitha said. "My parents had a marriage of convenience. I never saw them fight, but I also never saw them show affection. They were polite strangers who lived in the same house." "Is that why you ran from your father's choice of husband?" "Partly," Tabitha admitted. "But also because I wanted to know who I was on my own without my family's name or money defining me. I wanted to prove that I could make my own way." "And have you?" Dylan asked gently. "Proven it, I mean." Tabitha thought about the schoolhouse, about her students, about the life she was building in this harsh place. "I am beginning to," she said. "Each day, I am a little more certain that I made the right choice." They sat together as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, talking about their lives and their dreams. Dylan told her about learning blacksmithing from his father, about the satisfaction of taking raw metal and shaping it into something useful and beautiful. Tabitha told him about her mother, who had secretly encouraged her to seek more from life than a society marriage, who had given her the money for the train ticket west just before she died. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman too," Dylan said. "She was trapped by the expectations of her time," Tabitha said. "But she did not want the same for me. Her last words to me were live freely. I try to honor that every day." As they walked back toward town in the gathering dusk, Dylan reached out and took Tabitha's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt momentous, this first intentional touch between them. His hand was large and calloused from work, but his grip was gentle. "May I call on you again?" Dylan asked as they reached the boarding house. "Properly, I mean. I would like to court you if you are willing." Tabitha felt joy bubble up inside her. "I would like that very much." "Then I will come by next Sunday afternoon if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly," Tabitha said. Dylan lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and gallant that it made Tabitha's breath catch. Then he was gone, striding off into the darkness toward his forge, and Tabitha was left standing on the porch with her heart pounding and her hand still warm from his touch. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Dylan called on Tabitha every Sunday, and they spent their afternoons walking, talking, discovering each other. He took her to see his forge and showed her how he worked, explaining the different temperatures of the fire and the techniques for shaping metal. She read to him from her favorite books, sharing the poetry and literature she loved, and was delighted to discover that he had a keen appreciation for words despite his limited formal education. The town noticed, of course. Pyramid City was too small for such a courtship to go unnoticed. Some of the townsfolk smiled and nodded their approval, pleased to see the schoolteacher and the blacksmith finding happiness together. Others were less kind, whispering that Tabitha was setting her sights too low, that she could have done better than a common tradesman, even if her own circumstances were reduced. Tabitha ignored the gossip. For the first time in her life, she was falling in love, and the opinions of people who barely knew her seemed irrelevant. Dylan was everything she had not known she was looking for: strong but gentle, intelligent despite his lack of formal schooling, ambitious but not at the expense of others. He listened when she spoke, valued her opinions, and never once suggested that she should give up teaching to focus on being someone's wife. One Sunday in late September, nearly 2 months after Dylan had first repaired the schoolhouse door, he took Tabitha to a spot along the Truckee River where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the sound of running water created a peaceful backdrop. He spread a blanket he had borrowed from his shop and unpacked a basket of food he had clearly put thought into preparing. "This is wonderful," Tabitha said, touched by the effort he had made. There was fresh bread, cheese, apples, and even a small jar of honey. They ate and talked as they always did, but Tabitha sensed something different about Dylan today. He seemed nervous, his usual calm focus replaced by a restless energy. "Tabitha," he said finally, setting down the apple he had been pretending to eat, "I need to tell you something." Her heart clenched. "What is it?" "I am in love with you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I think I have been since the day you came to my forge asking about the door. You were so determined, so fierce in your dedication to those children, and I could not help but admire you. And then I got to know you, and admiration became something deeper. You make me want to be better, to build something more than just horseshoes and wagon wheels. I wake up thinking about you, and I go to sleep with your voice in my head. I have never felt this way about anyone, and I needed you to know." Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes. "Dylan, I love you too. I tried not to at first. I told myself I came here to build a life of my own, not to fall into the arms of the first man who showed me kindness. But you are not just any man, and what I feel for you is not gratitude. It is love, real and true and sometimes frightening in its intensity." Dylan reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Tabitha whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet, a kiss of promise and hope. Tabitha felt something inside her unfurl, some part of herself she had kept protected opening to the possibility of true intimacy. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Dylan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Tabitha. I know we have not been courting long, but I am certain. I want to build a life with you, to support your teaching, to be your partner in all things. Say yes." Tabitha's practical side urged caution, reminded her that they had known each other only a few months, but her heart knew what it wanted. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Dylan laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed her again, deeper this time. When they finally drew apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, a band of gold with a small garnet set in the center. "It was my mother's," he said. "My father gave it to me before he died and told me to give it to a woman who had fire in her heart. I think he would have loved you." Tabitha looked at the ring, at the way the garnet caught the afternoon light, and felt overwhelmed by the significance of this moment. "I will treasure it always," she said. Dylan slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They sat together under the cottonwood trees, planning their future, talking about where they would live and how they would manage their careers. Dylan wanted to expand his blacksmithing business, perhaps take on an apprentice. Tabitha wanted to continue teaching but also dreamed of starting a lending library for the town. "We will make it all work," Dylan said confidently. "Together, we can do anything." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church at the center of Pyramid City. Tabitha wore a dress she had sewn herself from cream-colored silk that Mrs. Morrison had helped her order from San Francisco. Dylan wore a new suit, the first he had ever owned, and he looked so handsome that Tabitha's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. The whole town turned out for the wedding. Tabitha's students sat in the front rows, scrubbed clean and dressed in their Sunday best, their faces shining with excitement. Mrs. Morrison dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief throughout the ceremony. Even some of the gruff miners who frequented Dylan's forge showed up, standing in the back and looking uncomfortable in their clean shirts. The Reverend kept the ceremony simple, and when it came time for Dylan to kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that made several of the women in attendance sigh. As they walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, Tabitha felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. They held a reception in the church hall, where the townspeople had contributed food, and the local fiddler played dancing music. Dylan whirled Tabitha around the floor with more grace than she had expected, and she laughed with pure joy as he dipped her dramatically. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, breathless. "My mother taught me," he said. "She said any man who wanted to win a good woman needed to know how to dance." As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Dylan leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Kane?" The sound of her new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, Mr. Kane, I am." Dylan had spent the past weeks renovating the rooms above his forge, transforming them from basic bachelor quarters into a proper home. Tabitha had not been allowed to see the work in progress, and when he carried her over the threshold that night, she gasped in surprise. The space had been completely transformed. The walls were freshly painted, the floors sanded and polished. There was a sitting area with a small sofa and 2 comfortable chairs, a dining table that Dylan had built himself, and a kitchen area with a new stove. Through an open door, she could see a bedroom with a large bed covered in a beautiful quilt that she recognized as Mrs. Morrison's handiwork. "Dylan, this is beautiful," she said, turning in a circle to take it all in. "When did you do all this?" "I have been working on it for weeks," he admitted. "Every spare moment. I wanted our home to be ready for you, to be a place worthy of the life we are going to build together." Tabitha felt tears well up again. She had cried more in the past few months than in her entire life before, but these were tears of happiness, of being loved in a way she had never imagined possible. That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Dylan held Tabitha close and stroked her hair. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I knew was possible," Tabitha answered honestly. "Are you?" "More than I can say," Dylan said. "Thank you for seeing past the soot and the rough hands to the man underneath. Thank you for seeing past the stern schoolteacher to the woman who wanted to be loved," Tabitha replied. They talked late into the night, as they always did, their conversations ranging from practical matters like how they would organize their household to dreams of the future they would build together. When they finally slept, it was wrapped in each other's arms, safe and loved. The next morning, Tabitha woke to find Dylan already dressed and working in the forge below. She could hear the familiar ring of his hammer, a sound that she now associated with home. She dressed quickly and made coffee, then brought him a cup as he worked. "Good morning, wife," he said, setting aside his hammer to accept the coffee with a kiss. "Good morning, husband," Tabitha replied, loving the way the words sounded. They fell into a rhythm over the next weeks. Tabitha continued teaching, walking down the hill to the schoolhouse each morning and returning each afternoon to prepare dinner. Dylan worked in his forge, taking on commissions from local ranchers and miners, building his reputation as a craftsman of exceptional skill. In the evenings, they would sit together and read, or walk through town, or simply talk about their days. The marriage deepened their love rather than diminishing it. Tabitha discovered that living with Dylan was easy in ways she had not anticipated. He was considerate of her needs, always making sure she had quiet time to prepare her lessons. She learned to read his moods, to know when he needed to work through a problem alone and when he needed to talk it through with her. Winter came early to Pyramid City that year, bringing snow to the mountains and cold winds that whistled through the town. The schoolhouse, with its new door and frame, stayed warm and secure, and Tabitha thought often of how different things would have been if Dylan had not rebuilt it. The children would have suffered in the cold, and she would never have had reason to speak to the quiet blacksmith who had become the center of her world. One evening in December, as they sat by the stove with Tabitha reading aloud from a novel and Dylan mending a broken harness, he suddenly spoke. "I have been thinking," he said, "about expanding the business." Tabitha set down her book, giving him her full attention. "Tell me." "There is a lot adjacent to the forge that is for sale. I could buy it and build a proper shop with room for an apprentice and better equipment. But it would take most of our savings and it is a risk." "Do you think you can make it succeed?" Tabitha asked. "I do," Dylan said. "There is more work than I can handle alone, and I have been turning away commissions. With help and better tools, I could grow the business significantly." "Then we should do it," Tabitha said firmly. "We have my teaching salary to live on while you build. This is your dream, Dylan. I will not let fear hold you back from it." Dylan set aside the harness and pulled Tabitha into his lap. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured against her hair. "We both got lucky," Tabitha said. "The day I walked into your forge asking about door hinges. Dylan bought the land in January and began construction on the new shop in February, working on it during any daylight hours when he did not have urgent commissions. Tabitha helped when she could, holding boards steady while he nailed them in place, painting walls and organizing the tools and supplies. They worked side by side, building not just a shop but a future. By April, the new shop was finished, and Dylan hired a young man named Peter to apprentice with him. Peter was 18, eager to learn, and had a natural aptitude for metalwork. With his help, Dylan was able to take on larger projects, including a commission to create decorative ironwork for a new bank being built on Main Street. The success of the business brought financial security that neither Tabitha nor Dylan had known before. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, able to save money and plan for the future without constant worry. In May, Tabitha realized she had not had her monthly courses in nearly 3 months. She said nothing to Dylan at first, not wanting to get his hopes up if she was wrong. But when the nausea started and her dresses began to feel tight around the waist, she could no longer deny what was happening. She chose a Sunday evening to tell him after they had finished dinner and were relaxing on the sofa. Her hands were shaking as she took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Dylan," she said softly, "we are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Truly, we are going to be parents." "Yes," Tabitha said, laughing and crying at the same time. "In November, I think." Dylan pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with infinite care as if she had suddenly become fragile. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much, Tabitha." "I love you too," she whispered. "Are you happy about this?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Dylan said. "I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. The pregnancy was not easy." Tabitha continued teaching through June, but the heat of summer combined with the morning sickness made each day a challenge. Dylan worried constantly, insisting she rest more, eat more, do less. Finally, at the end of the school term, Tabitha agreed to take a break from teaching, at least until after the baby was born. The summer stretched long and hot. Tabitha spent her days reading, sewing baby clothes, and preparing the small room next to their bedroom as a nursery. Dylan built a beautiful cradle from oak, carving delicate patterns into the wood during the long evenings when it was too hot to work in the forge. Mrs. Morrison came by often, bringing food and advice based on her experience raising 5 children. The women of the town, many of whom had kept their distance from Tabitha when she first arrived, now welcomed her as one of them, brought together by the universal experience of motherhood. In late October, Tabitha woke in the middle of the night with a tightening sensation in her belly. She lay still for a moment, not wanting to wake Dylan unnecessarily, but when the sensation came again, stronger this time, she knew it was time. "Dylan," she said, shaking his shoulder gently, "the baby is coming." He was instantly awake, fumbling for matches to light the lamp. "Now." "Are you certain?" "I am certain," Tabitha said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. She had attended enough childbirths in Boston to know that this was a dangerous time, that women died bringing children into the world. But she had also seen many successful births, and she chose to focus on that. Dylan ran to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Morrison, leaving Tabitha alone in the house for the first time since they had married. She breathed through the contractions, which were growing stronger, and tried to remember everything she had been told about childbirth. Mrs. Morrison arrived first, taking charge with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times. She helped Tabitha into a nightgown, changed the sheets on the bed, and set water to boiling. "You are going to do fine, dear," she said firmly. "First babies take their time. You just breathe and let your body do what it knows how to do." The doctor arrived an hour later, a gruff man named Harrison who had seen more than his share of frontier births. He examined Tabitha and pronounced that everything was progressing normally, then settled in to wait. Dylan was not allowed in the bedroom, following the custom of the time, but Tabitha could hear him pacing in the next room, his boots creating a steady rhythm that somehow comforted her. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Tabitha had never known such pain, but she also had never felt so strong, so connected to the fundamental force of life itself. Mrs. Morrison stayed with her throughout, offering water and encouragement, telling her when to push and when to rest. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, she felt the baby move through her, and then there was a cry, high and insistent. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, red-faced infant, "and he has a healthy set of lungs." Mrs. Morrison cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Tabitha's arms. She looked down at her son, at his tiny fingers and the dark hair plastered to his small head, and felt a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered. Dylan was finally allowed in, and when he saw his wife and son together, tears streamed down his face unashamedly. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out one finger to touch the baby's cheek. "He is so small," Dylan said in wonder. "He will grow," Tabitha said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Dylan said, "Daniel, after my father, Daniel Kane." "Daniel," Tabitha repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Daniel was a good baby, but he still needed to be fed every few hours, changed, rocked, and soothed. Tabitha and Dylan took turns walking him through the night when he fussed, both of them bleary-eyed but happy. Peter proved invaluable during this time, taking on more responsibility in the forge so that Dylan could spend time with his family. The apprentice had developed into a skilled craftsman, and Dylan began to trust him with increasingly complex projects. By the time Daniel was 3 months old, Tabitha was beginning to feel like herself again. She missed teaching but was not ready to leave her son yet. Instead, she started the lending library she had dreamed of, organizing it in one corner of their living space and opening it to townspeople 2 afternoons a week. It was a small thing, but it gave her a sense of purpose beyond motherhood, reminded her that she was still Tabitha Reed Kane, educator and advocate for learning. Daniel grew quickly, reaching for objects and smiling at his parents by 4 months. Dylan was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him to grip his finger and talking to him about metalworking even though the baby clearly understood nothing. "You are going to make him a blacksmith before he can walk," Tabitha teased one evening, watching Dylan hold up different tools for Daniel to look at. "Nothing wrong with starting his education early," Dylan replied, grinning. "Though I will love him just as much if he wants to be a teacher like his mother or anything else he chooses." Spring came again, and with it, the start of a new school term. The school board had hired a temporary teacher while Tabitha was away, but they made it clear that they wanted her back when she was ready. After much discussion, Tabitha and Dylan decided that she would return to teaching 3 days a week, with Mrs. Morrison watching Daniel during those hours. It was not perfect, but it allowed Tabitha to continue her work while still being present for her son. The arrangement worked well. Tabitha found that her time away from Daniel made her appreciate the hours with him even more, and the intellectual stimulation of teaching kept her mind sharp and engaged. Dylan continued to build his business, and Peter proved so capable that Dylan began to talk about eventually making him a partner. Life in Pyramid City settled into a comfortable pattern. The town was growing, with new families arriving regularly as the railroad pushed further into Nevada. The schoolhouse was bursting at the seams with students, and there was talk of building a second, larger school. Tabitha threw herself into fundraising efforts, organizing box socials and community gatherings to raise money. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Dylan took Tabitha back to the spot by the Truckee River where he had proposed. They brought Daniel, who was now a sturdy toddler more interested in the water and rocks than in his parents' sentimentality. "You remember this place?" Dylan asked as they spread the blanket. "Of course," Tabitha said. "This is where you told me you loved me, where you asked me to marry you. Do you have any regrets?" Dylan asked, watching Daniel toddle after a butterfly. Tabitha looked at her husband, at the fine lines beginning to appear at the corners of his eyes, at the way his hair was starting to show silver at the temples. She thought about their life together, about the challenges they had faced and overcome, about the love that had only grown deeper with time. "Not a single one," she said. "You are the best decision I ever made, Dylan Kane." He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and sweet, while Daniel shouted with delight as he caught the butterfly and then immediately released it, watching it flutter away. Over the next years, their family grew. When Daniel was 3, Tabitha gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma. The twins were identical in appearance but completely different in temperament. Sarah was quiet and thoughtful, always watching and learning. Emma was loud and adventurous, constantly getting into trouble and charming her way out of it. Dylan expanded the blacksmithing business again, building a second shop closer to the railroad depot to capture the trade from passing trains. Peter managed the original shop, now a full partner in the business, while Dylan oversaw both locations. The success they had built together allowed them to buy a proper house with a yard for the children to play in. Tabitha returned to teaching full-time once the twins were old enough for school themselves. She had fought hard for the new schoolhouse to be built, and when it finally opened, she stood in the spacious classroom with its multiple windows and proper desks and thought about that first day when she had stood in a cramped, hot room with a door falling off its hinges. The original schoolhouse still stood, though it was now used for storage. Sometimes, on her way home, Tabitha would stop and run her hand over the door frame that Dylan had built all those years ago. It was still solid, still true, a testament to the care he had taken in creating something to last. When Daniel was 12, he announced that he wanted to learn blacksmithing from his father. Dylan's face lit up with pride, but he made sure to ask his son, "Are you certain? You could do anything you want. Your mother and I will support whatever you choose." "I am certain," Daniel said seriously. "I want to build things like you do, Dad. I want to create things that last." And so Daniel became an apprentice in the family business, working alongside his father and Peter. He had a natural aptitude for the work, and Dylan was careful to teach him not just the skills but the philosophy behind them. That anything worth doing was worth doing right, that quality mattered more than speed, that the goal was to create things that would outlast their creators. The twins followed their mother into education. Sarah wanted to be a teacher like Tabitha, while Emma dreamed of opening a school for girls that would teach not just reading and writing, but also mathematics and science. Tabitha encouraged both of them, proud that her daughters saw no limits on what they could achieve. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Dylan surprised Tabitha with a trip back east to visit Boston. It was a difficult journey, requiring trains and connections and days of travel, but Dylan had been planning it for months. Tabitha had not been back to Boston since she left at age 22. She was now 37, a wife and mother and respected educator. As the train pulled into the station, she felt nervous about seeing the city of her youth, wondering how it would compare to her memories. Her father had died 5 years earlier, and they stayed with her younger sister, who had made the convenient marriage that Tabitha had refused. Margaret's life was comfortable but empty, filled with social obligations and meaningless routines. She looked at Tabitha with a mixture of envy and incomprehension. "You seem happy," Margaret said one afternoon as they took tea in her formal parlor. "Even though you live in such a rough place, even though you have to work." "I am happy," Tabitha said simply. "I have meaningful work, a partner who respects me, and children who are being raised to think for themselves. I would not trade my life for anything." They visited the old neighborhood where Tabitha had grown up, walked through the public garden, attended a concert at Symphony Hall. Dylan was fascinated by the city, by its history and culture, but Tabitha could see that he was also uncomfortable in the crowds, among the towering buildings. "Ready to go home?" she asked him on their last night in the city. "More than ready," Dylan admitted. "This is impressive, but it is not for me. I need space to breathe, room to work. I need the desert and the mountains." "Me too," Tabitha said, surprised to realize it was true. Somewhere along the way, Pyramid City had become home in a way Boston never had been. They returned to Nevada with relief, greeted by their 3 children and Mrs. Morrison and half the town at the train station. Daniel had grown another inch in the 2 weeks they were gone. The twins threw themselves at their parents with stories about everything that had happened while they were away. That night, in their own bed in their own house, Dylan pulled Tabitha close. "Thank you for sharing your past with me, but I am glad our future is here." "So am I," Tabitha said. "This is where we built our life, where we belong." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Daniel grew into a fine young man, skilled in his craft and eventually taking over the day-to-day management of the business. At 22, he married a miner's daughter named Catherine, and they gave Dylan and Tabitha their first grandchild, a boy named David, within a year. Sarah became a teacher as she had planned, taking over Tabitha's position when Tabitha finally retired at age 50. Emma opened her school for girls with financial backing from her father and moral support from her mother. The school was controversial at first, with many people questioning the need for girls to learn advanced subjects. But Emma was as fierce and determined as her mother had ever been. Tabitha and Dylan grew old together, their hair graying, their movements slower, but their love as strong as ever. They sat on the porch of their house in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, and remembered the young people they had been when they first met. "Do you ever think about that day?" Tabitha asked one evening as the sun set over the mountains. "When I came to your forge asking about the schoolhouse door, I think about it often," Dylan said, taking her hand. "I almost turned you away, told you I was too busy. But something made me look up, and when I saw you standing there with that determined expression, I knew my life was about to change." "Mine too," Tabitha said softly. "I came here looking for purpose, for a way to prove myself. I never expected to find love." "The best things often come when we are not looking for them," Dylan said. "You needed hinges for a door. I built you a whole new frame, and in the process we built a whole new life. We did, didn't we?" Tabitha said, looking around at the evidence of that life. The house Dylan had built with his own hands, the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, the town that had grown and prospered in part because of their contributions. When Tabitha was 55, she started writing a history of Pyramid City, documenting the stories of the people who had built the town from nothing. She interviewed the old-timers, the miners and ranchers and railroad workers who had been there from the beginning. She wrote about the struggles and triumphs, the hardships and joys of frontier life. The book was published when she was 58, and it became required reading in the local schools. Tabitha was proud of it, proud to have captured a piece of history before the people who had lived it were all gone. Dylan, meanwhile, had become something of a legend in his own right. His metalwork was known throughout Nevada, and he had trained dozens of apprentices over the years. But his proudest achievement was his family. His son, who had taken over the business and made it even more successful. His daughters, who were changing the world in their own ways. His grandchildren, who were growing up with opportunities their grandparents had never dreamed of. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole town threw a celebration in their honor. The current mayor gave a speech about how Dylan and Tabitha had helped build Pyramid City into what it was today. Their children and grandchildren stood up and told embarrassing and heartwarming stories. Friends and former students shared memories of how Dylan and Tabitha had touched their lives. Dylan and Tabitha stood together through it all, hands clasped, faces wreathed in smiles. When it came time for them to speak, Dylan deferred to Tabitha. She stood before the gathered crowd, this woman who had come west 40 years ago as a frightened but determined young teacher, and spoke from her heart. 40 years ago, I arrived in Pyramid City with nothing but determination and a dream of making a difference. I was young and foolish and had no idea how hard life on the frontier would be. Within months, I was struggling, overwhelmed by the challenges of teaching in such difficult conditions. A broken door nearly defeated me. She paused, looking at Dylan. But then I met a blacksmith who taught me that when something is broken, you do not just patch it up and hope for the best. You rebuild it properly. You create something that will last. Dylan did not just fix my door. He showed me what was possible when two people work together toward a common goal. Her voice grew thick with emotion. We have built a beautiful life together, Dylan and I. We have raised children who make us proud every day. We have contributed to this community in ways large and small. And through it all, we have loved each other with a devotion that has only grown stronger with time. She turned to face Dylan directly. Thank you, my love, for building me that door frame so many years ago. Thank you for building a life with me that has exceeded my wildest dreams. The crowd erupted in applause, and Dylan stood and pulled Tabitha into his arms, kissing her in front of everyone. Their children cheered, their grandchildren laughed, and Tabitha felt a happiness so complete, it seemed to radiate from the very center of her being. Dylan and Tabitha grew into their 70s together, still active despite the aches and pains that came with age. Dylan could no longer work full-time in the forge, but he still went in most days to oversee projects and teach the younger workers. Tabitha had long since retired from teaching, but she tutored children in the afternoons and continued to maintain the lending library that had grown into a proper public library housed in its own building. They watched their grandchildren grow and start families of their own. Daniel and Catherine had 4 children. Sarah married a kind lawyer and had 3 daughters. Emma, ever unconventional, married one of her fellow teachers, and they adopted 2 children who needed homes. The family gathered every Sunday for dinner, a raucous affair with children running everywhere and multiple conversations happening at once. Dylan and Tabitha presided over these gatherings from their places at the head of the table, their faces glowing with contentment. When Dylan was 74, he fell ill with pneumonia during a harsh winter. Tabitha nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had brought to everything in her life. She sat by his bedside night after night, reading to him, talking to him, willing him to live. He recovered, but it took months before he was truly himself again. The experience scared both of them, made them realize that their time together was finite, that every day was precious. "I am not ready to let you go," Tabitha told him one night as they lay in bed, his hand in hers. "I am not going anywhere," Dylan promised. "We still have years ahead of us." And they did. Dylan lived to be 82 and Tabitha made it to 81. In their final years, they moved into a small cottage that Daniel had built for them behind his own house, where they could be cared for by family. Dylan's mind stayed sharp until the very end, but his body slowly failed him. He spent his last months in a chair by the window, watching the desert landscape he loved, holding Tabitha's hand. They talked about their life together, remembered the adventures they had shared, the challenges they had overcome. "We did good, didn't we?" Dylan said one afternoon, his voice weak but his eyes bright. "We did better than good," Tabitha said. "We built something real and lasting, our love, our family, our legacy. It will continue long after we are gone." Dylan passed peacefully in his sleep on a warm spring night, with Tabitha beside him as she had been for more than 50 years. At his funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives he had touched, former apprentices, customers, friends, and family. Tabitha sat in the front pew, supported by her children, and listened to the stories people told about her husband's kindness, his skill, his integrity. After Dylan died, Tabitha's own health began to fail. She had lost her partner, her other half, and without him, she seemed to simply lose the will to continue. She told her children that she was ready, that she had lived a full and happy life and was not afraid of what came next. "Your father and I built something beautiful together," she told them. "We loved each other completely, raised you to be good people, and contributed to our community. I have no regrets, no sorrow except that I will miss watching you all continue to grow and thrive." Sarah held her mother's hand. "You and Dad showed us what love should look like. Every day of my marriage, I try to live up to the example you set." Emma wiped away tears. "You taught me to be brave, Mom, to not let anyone tell me what I could or could not do. Everything I have accomplished is because you showed me it was possible." Daniel, always his father's son, struggled to find words. "You made Dad happy," he finally said. "From the day he met you until the day he died, you were his joy. Thank you for that." Tabitha passed away 3 months after Dylan, dying in her sleep just as he had. At her funeral, the church was even more packed than it had been for Dylan's service. Former students, now grandparents themselves, stood up to talk about the teacher who had changed their lives. Women who had attended Emma's school spoke about the legacy Tabitha had created by raising a daughter who refused to accept limitations. They buried her next to Dylan in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Pyramid City. The headstone was simple: Tabitha Reed Kane, beloved wife, mother, teacher. She came to make a difference and succeeded beyond measure. Years later, when the old schoolhouse was finally torn down to make room for a new building, the door frame that Dylan had built was salvaged. It was displayed in the town museum along with a plaque that told the story of the teacher who needed hinges and the blacksmith who built her a whole new frame, and in doing so, built a love story that became part of the town's history. Their great-great-grandchildren would visit the museum and see that door frame, still solid after more than a century, and they would learn about Tabitha and Dylan, about how a simple act of kindness grew into a lifetime of love. They would learn that sometimes the most important things in life come from unexpected places, that love can be found in the dust and heat of a desert town, that two people who choose each other and work together can build something that lasts forever. The blacksmith's forge was still in operation, now run by Daniel's great-grandson, a young man who had inherited his ancestors' skill and dedication. The school that Sarah had taught in for so many years had been replaced by a modern building, but teachers still told stories about Tabitha Reed Kane, the brave young woman from Boston who had come west to teach and stayed to build a legacy. And on quiet evenings, when the desert wind blew through Pyramid City, old-timers would gather on porches and tell the story of how it all began. With a broken door, a determined teacher, and a blacksmith who understood that when something is worth doing, it is worth doing right. They would talk about the love that had grown from that first meeting, about the family that had been created, about the way two lives had intertwined to become one beautiful story. It was a story about love, yes, but also about partnership and respect and choosing to build something together rather than trying to go it alone. It was about seeing potential where others saw only problems, about taking the time to do things properly even when it would be easier to cut corners. It was about two people from different worlds who found in each other exactly what they needed, even if they had not known they were searching for it. The door frame that Dylan had built for Tabitha stood for over 100 years before it was moved to the museum, a testament to the care he had taken in creating it. But the real legacy of their love was not made of wood and metal. It was in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their values forward. It was in the schools and libraries and businesses they had helped to create. It was in the story itself, passed down through generations, reminding people that love can begin in the most ordinary moments and grow into something extraordinary. Tabitha had come to Pyramid City looking for purpose, for a way to prove that she could make her own way in the world. Dylan had come looking for a fresh start, for a place where his past would not define his future. Neither of them had been looking for love, but they had found it anyway, in the space between a broken door and a new frame, in the conversation that began with a simple request and grew into a lifetime of shared dreams. Their story became part of the fabric of Pyramid City, woven into the town's history as thoroughly as the wooden buildings and dusty streets. When people asked what made the town special, what had allowed it to thrive when so many other frontier settlements had faded away, the answer always came back to people like Tabitha and Dylan, people who had built not just businesses and schools but a real community based on mutual support and genuine care for one another. The museum where the door frame was displayed became a popular destination for school field trips. Children would stand in front of the carefully preserved wood, studying the precise joints and the hinges that Dylan had forged himself, and they would hear the story of how this simple construction project had changed 2 lives. Teachers used the story to talk about kindness and craftsmanship, about how small actions can have large consequences, about how love is built through daily choices and consistent effort rather than grand gestures. Parents used it to show their children what a good marriage looked like, how partners should support each other's dreams and work together toward common goals. And sometimes, on the anniversary of their wedding, the whole Kane family would gather at the cemetery on the hill. They would bring flowers to place on the graves of Tabitha and Dylan, and someone would tell the story again for the youngest children who had not yet heard it. They would talk about the schoolteacher who was brave enough to leave everything she knew to pursue her dreams in the untamed West. They would talk about the blacksmith who saw beyond the simple request for help to the woman who needed not just a new door frame but a partner in life. They would talk about the love that had grown between them, steady and strong and true, lasting through hardships and triumphs alike. And they would remember that it all started with hinges, with a door that was falling apart and a man who chose to build something new instead of just patching up what was broken. They would remember that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places, that love often begins with the smallest acts of kindness, and that 2 people who truly choose each other can build a legacy that outlasts them by generations. As the sun set over Pyramid City, casting long shadows across the cemetery and painting the sky in those same shades of orange and purple that had awed Tabitha so many years ago, the Kane family would stand together, united by the love story that had started it all. And in that moment, the spirits of Tabitha and Dylan would seem very close, watching over the family they had created, proud of the legacy they had left behind, forever together in the town they had helped to build and the hearts they had touched. Their story was complete, a closed circle of love and life and legacy. From the first meeting at the forge to the final rest side by side on the hill, Tabitha Reed Kane and Dylan Kane had lived a life worthy of being remembered and retold. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, had built a love that weathered every storm, had raised a family that continued their values, and had contributed to their community in ways both large and small. And it had all begun because she needed hinges for the schoolhouse door, and the blacksmith Cowboy had built her a whole new frame.